Absolutely. Speaking of like music and the importance of music, when you are diving into an arrangement and you're like, all right, this is going to go, and you get the arrangement from the brass person at Boston, which I don't know at that
Ryan
time. Sorry.
George,
All right, there it
Ryan
is.
George.
So do you take his arrangement and then like also take like the source material and like how much research and deep diving are you doing into that as far as when you're gonna put in your own style and then getting the front ensemble arrangements and like does that happen first? Does that happen last in some instances? Like take turns like all right, I have an idea for here, then we'll write the pit or got the pit book and then I'll write in and fill in on top of it.
I think it's different with every group you're ever involved with. Cadets, the approach was extremely different. At Boston, what was different was that we hired Keith Potter, who is the artistic director, and he's, a guard icon and was programming at Crown. I think when you were there,
Hmm.
he was, '09 to 16. He was the artistic director and coming up with the show ideas. So when you hire Keith Potter, the idea is that we're doing a show about witches, Salem witch trials. So everything has to follow in suit with that character. So that's the first thing is thinking about like I was thinking about like talking about Boston. So we did like an SOS show, I think in 18. So that was like, okay, well, what does that mean? What is SOS? What's the Morse code? So it starts really more from the holistic part, especially in today's pageantry. It's about the overall show design because you want the guard to succeed, you want the brass to succeed. There's just so many more people in the cast that require, synergy. Doing indoor is a lot more freeing because there's just less elements that you can be creative within the percussion element because there's only percussion and electronics. So I think that really how we would program at Boston was really about starting with what is the show? Like this year was Zoom. What is Zoom? Well, it's going to be about speed. It's going to be about perspective, zooming in, zooming out. We kind of talked in terms of general terms like that. So then it was more about how can we create great music within that, and then from there it's a deep dive into the source material, however that is. The Zoom thing was fun because Ryan George is a composer. He composes a lot of commissions for wind ensemble, and this was one of the first years that we actually really the first 4 minutes of the show was very composed. It was based off of a trailer from the movie Somewhere, which is a Sofia Coppola movie. It was just this aesthetic, and we took that minimalist and then we kind of were able to create around it. So I think it really depends on like what the show is first, and then we go deep dive in, from there. In 18 we did Remember Spiritual, so then, and I had experience with that with Blast. That was like the same conversation we had with Medea, was doing Remember Spiritual again was sort of like, okay, well, I already did this we did this with Brass Theater, which was the first incarnation of Blast that did that piece, and then they took it to Broadway. How are we going to do that differently? Well, we kind of just blew up the scale a little bit and then let the guard go crazy. So we had like a vision for letting the guard sort of be the face of that piece. And then everything that I wrote had to be phrased in a way that the guard could really succeed. So I think there's just a lot more details you have to think about than just the drumming. And then you can get inside of that. But the way that we start is really from Keith's vision first. And then we go into like meetings with Ryan George, the composer. So we kind of go into composing an outline of like what the role of the percussion is going to be. And then Ian Moyer, my writing partner, and Mike Zellers, who does the electronics with us, then the three of us get together and we start creating. Then we can start to be creative within that, but not until we have the parameters of that stuff set in modern drum corps.
Makes sense. You're kind of segueing me on your own, which is killer. Um, but you're talking about like the attention to details and stuff like that. So I've heard that you are very attentive and meticulous to detail when it comes to just like writing your music, and also just your staffing as far as the expectation for the staff to understand the music, to have the music, and just like teaching it and very meticulous with like scheduling. And I think that that's one part of the activity that a lot of people miss, especially with a big organization like yours, which I think really can be I don't know, inserted into any organization, but just not going into a rehearsal with being like, well, this sounded bad yesterday, so I guess we'll work on that for a little bit, and I guess we'll work on this for a little bit. So
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't work because, you have to have a bigger plan than that. A lot of it starts with what was the reason you wrote it in the first place. And my mentor was Tom Hannum. So if you look at Tom Hannum's scores over the years, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of information on the scores. So that's what I come from. I've
Is he
evolved a
still
little.
handwriting his?
No, he's not, but I still am.
Oh,
Funny
are you?
enough. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
wow, dude, that's
I'm
sick.
I am for my like the drum corps groups. I definitely do. I use finale at a slower pace, and I use that with my bands and stuff like that. But the drum corps kids get my handwritten scores because I feel like I can manipulate the detail on the score better. The difference that I've changed, like when I was teaching stars, so this is a million years ago, what was on the page is what we taught, and that was it. Until that was perfect, I didn't even think about changing the parts. And I think that what I've evolved in is that we start from that premise, and then when it's needed, we change. So we can pivot based on, yeah, let's bring that up a little bit. And sometimes I'm like, no, let's bring the tap level down a little bit because that's, even though it's uncomfortable, it's important for that part of the show. Um, but I think being flexible is the way to kind of do it now, to try to be more flexible about the player perspective is something that is more important to me than it used to be. But we're talking about a smaller degree of change because you're starting from a very organized place. And that's my approach, is to have I want all the sound organized, and then I want to mess it up. That's more how I write.
I love it. So speaking of like you're talking about heights and this and that, are you, I guess, pedagogically into you put heights on the page versus dynamics, or is it like a little bit of a hybrid of both? Um, are you into more like the look of like everybody moves the same, or well, let's try to make everybody sound is the same and then adjust the look from that if somebody's like way out of whack? What's kind of your philosophy in that regard?
I think the thing that I do that is from the old days is that it's about individual quality. So the individual, like a lot of our assignments that we do are based on the individual being able to perform as a soloist, play their stuff to, in a lot of cases now we do it to the MIDI, we'll do it to the brass MIDI. So they're required to play the parts to the wind MIDI, and it's got to be perfect within that context. That's like what we're doing virtually. So that's where we start from. But the heights and like the basic, I have a height system, I guess. Like I talk about like a zip code. It's like the city limits. To get in the city limits, you have to have, the dynamic scheme is this. And I do that from a player perspective because I was a player, it's not that deep. I mean, I'm not a composer. I compose for a living, but I'm not a composer. I was a player, and I was a technician. So I think everything I write starts from there, how I would play it. And then from there, we will adjust. So you're in that city limits when you start adjusting. And there are definitely, I mean, we're adjusting the dynamics all the time. But the way it's written, they're required to play it how it's written. But that being said, heights aren't mathematical because if we play low and fast, it's light. If we play low and open rhythms, it's weighted. If we play huge fortissimo, some kind of a content that's not just slams at the end of a phrase, but you're playing, fours, or you're playing some kind of something that is articulated. We play with weight if it's open enough. So I think the touch is always changing. The quality of the sound inside the dynamics is always changing. That's what makes drumming so unique. And I think the look of it for me is about the drumming style is the look. So like I try to write the drumming so that if you drum it right, it has a look. I don't make the look out of the drumming, if that makes sense. It's
Right.
not backwards. It's and not that if groups do that, it's fantastic. Just the way that I think about it is more because I write a very physical book. I mean, I like the energy, I like the visceral quality. As a player, when I played, that's what I was engaged with. So I like there to be an organic energy about the music. And we play a lot of notes. We play a lot of continuous phrases of notes. So for me, It's about trying to keep that energy going and sustaining it. So if we have to adjust something, it's based on that.
It's really cool to hear you use that analogy of like within the city limits, I guess, and it kind of encompasses something that I've verbalized on here many times at this point, that everybody's hands are built different. The size, length of everybody's fingers, the thickness, the palm size, the weight. So what's going to get one, like, obviously you're going to be in the ballpark, like that's city limits if you're all playing the same dynamic, but how high within your standard deviation of what height is it's going to be, it's going to differ from player to player to get the sound you want. And so it's going to be in the ballpark, it's going to be in that city limits. And if I've interpreted what you're saying right, like I think that's awesome to hear, because that's something that was maybe, and this could be completely naive on my part, being a younger age out and stuff like that, and not really around in the 90s and stuff, but it comes off to me that those older groups kind of were all about, we have to look uniform. We have to be completely the same across the board. Even if you can't hear us, it's got to look the same. But everyone's built different. Everyone's piano is going to be a little different. And as long as it's in that ballpark, it's going to work still. It's going to sound great because you're going to have person A playing with a certain sound quality and person B playing with that same sound quality. But if their hands look a little different, or I guess just if the hands just look a little different, it's still going to work amazingly well, because at the end of the day, like those little minutia of difference in the way two individual players look isn't going to be picked up by anybody, whether you're 20 feet away in the lot or hundreds of feet away in the crowd, in the stands, or a judge or whatever. So I think that's a great analogy for it, and groups have done it differently, but it's cool. I think that's amazing that the activity's gone that way.
Yeah, I mean, the sound, I'm just talking about my approach. The sound is the most important, because you do have different hands. You do have different sized hands. You do have different, the physical makeup of players are different. Their experience is different. If you watch my groups at Boston, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, they're all different. And we're actually in a longer breadth of development. I mean, one thing that I'm passionate about, because to be super transparent, I mean, I started in the Crusaders as a player. I marched in 88, 89, 90, 91. 4 years in the Crusaders, we never made top 12. We had some great drum lines, and we had some really talented people there. And it was always in a state of development, and that development is why I'm sort of addicted to that idea. Like going to Boston was the idea of, let's take this and let's see how far we can go with it. But it's going to take time. It doesn't take 1 year. It takes multiple years. And to create a style and to create something unique, it takes time. And along the way, you have ebbs and flows along the way. But the sound is the most important thing, because the best groups that I've ever had, or the best playing groups that you ever hear, they're in that kind of aggro zone of, they're able to play the book in a way that is uniform from a sound perspective, much different than just looking the part. Looking the part gets you through the camps. I do believe that there's certain, like, it's a down, like I'll notate downstroke, I'll notate that's going to float, that's going to be full strokes, there are notation that we do to get you in that city limits. But after that, the rest of the summer you spend finding that sweet spot where it sings, where the blend is the tuning of the drums is part of that, but the individual quality is the biggest part of that.
Yeah. And if you have that makes the most, go ahead, Evan.
Go ahead, Mike. No, you're good.
Okay. Well, I just cut a space, so go ahead. It'll come back to me.
I think that makes the most sense anyway as a performer, because you're talking about if someone's like, oh, your height's this, your height's that, like if me and Mike and you, Colin, and Zach Schlicker are standing in a line and we're doing the right thing and we're watching the drum major, watching our forms and stuff, like we can't see each other's heights. You're never gonna get that perspective. But what you can do is use those ears, open those ears, baby, and you can be like, all right, hear the people around you. Like, what does it sound like? How do you fit into this sound? Like your musical trio of like you in the middle and the people on each side of you. What's that blend like? And teaching kids how to use their ears and find that, as you said, that hum where it's just that pure balance is such a sweet feeling.
And I knew that you guys had that very quickly of seeing Boston this 2021 summer, because you watch the videos and you can look, if you look really close, and I'm a big snare drum nerd, so of course I was paying attention to this. I was like, I always dissect the players' hands, and I'm like looking at, kind of do it subconsciously a little bit. I'm like, oh, well, it's crazy. You can tell they're all getting good individual sound qualities because their hands don't look identical. You can look from player to player to player in the snare line, and they're close, and the motion is close, and how they're approaching the drum is the same, but the heights are slightly varied, hand position to the body is a little different, but again, it goes back to everyone's built different, and when you see a group that's like that, and that sounds phenomenal like you guys did, it's like, yeah, I guarantee I could ask any one of those 8 or 9, I think you all had 9 snare drums, and it goes for the quad line too, and probably the bass line. You could ask any one of them to play their parts individually, and it's going to sound great. And there have been groups that I've walked up to, and I'm like, I'm kind of questioning, and I'm not going to name any groups or years or whatever, but I've been like, well, I don't know if that person right there would sound amazing if they played that part by themselves right there. But you guys
name them.
But you guys just instantly struck me as like, I can tell that you're employing that individual sound quality. Are we producing the same level of I guess quality, for lack of a blanking on a different word for it right now? And Josh Brickey, shout out to him, his philosophy at X when we were there is it's like an 80-20 rule. 80% playing perfect like an individual, and 20% being aware of your surroundings. And that's going to get that amazing blend and balance from player to player, not if you're all playing the same 3-inch tap height. And it's going to be close, but it's going to sound amazing and be close enough. And that punched me in the face like from the first time I saw you guys this summer.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time in older drum corps where people played 2-height playing and really clean. And it was amazing, crystalline clean, like beyond clean. And then like Garfield cadets, I'm going back in time, Tom Hannum's groups in Garfield, like you're talking about like 80, 85, 80, not so much 86, but 87, 88. These groups, they were playing a wide range of dynamics and thinner parts. So then the height system really helped define how you can make a melodic drum line. And I think nowadays what I try to do is take that idea, but then institute better quality and better ear training, because it's all about the player, and that's why some years, like especially with the groups that I've had over the years, because I'll go to different groups when we're rebuilding, you guys, we were talking in the pre-interview, we were talking about Magic of Orlando, one of my favorite groups. It was a group that was really in a different level of competition when they started. And so for them, it was really about trying to strengthen the individual players. And if I had stayed there for 4 years, they would have gotten to a really high level. I think that a lot of times in the sports day that we live in, where, if you don't get results right away, people want to make a change. To me, I would say keep your staff longer and develop your system and develop it to the highest level. And then you can reach those places. And with Boston, I had the luxury that I wasn't going anywhere. I'm going to be here for a long time. So we're slowly building the program. And that's how you do it, is you get to that point where the players can really take the charge and be a difference maker in the performance. It's not so much about the writing. There's been a lot of arguments here and there about like, oh, is it the writer? Is it the player? To me, it's always the player. The writer has to make sure that they are set up for success, but the player brings it from an 85% to a 98%. And that takes time. And the best drum lines you have are the ones that have the experience where they can perform that and they can take charge of it. And it's fun. It's fun when you can get to that point. But it does take time. It's not something that's easy to do. And that's why there's only so many groups that sound the best. And we have certainly history on our side to go back. You can listen, and with the modern day of everything's recorded, you can hear that excellence from those groups that have that understanding.
Oh yeah, immortalized on YouTube.
Yeah.
So speaking of the players and modern drumming and this and that, and you being, I guess, a student of the game and just continuously learning yourself, how has it evolved with just keeping up with trends of what's hot, like what rudimental vocabulary the current kids are playing, like the craziness that has evolved of like bass splits and tenor rounds these days. How do you find yourself like keeping up or just evolving your arranging with that?
I mean, it's been cool because a lot of the stuff that the groups are playing at the highest level, a lot of it is what you would play in individuals. So like when I was a player in doing the individuals competition it was more of a thing that you did back when I marched. It was something that you sort of focused on. And that was a place where you were more creative because the way that the writing was back in those days, I'm old. So the writing in those days, that was where you saw a lot of the new ideas. And a lot of what I see now is sort of a regeneration of a lot of those ideas. I mean, you can watch some of the 80s Blue Devil snare drummers doing individuals. You can watch these guys play and you go, oh, that's what people are doing in indoor. To me, it's like there's a lot of that passover from the individual style of performing a solo to how we're performing as a full line. So that's something that definitely I'm tuned into. And, it's cool too, because having colleagues, we're all friends. We've been doing this so long. So being able to watch the other groups, of course, I'm always paying attention to seeing what people are doing and hyping, the different things that people are pulling off. And, so that's definitely stuff that we're dabbling in. But a lot of it, again, in drum corps, I think you're trying to think about, what does the music need? There's always that weight of like, what does the show need? What does the music need? But there are those spots where you can open up, hopefully, and do some things that are a little avant-garde. We were talking in the pre-interview a little bit about like, do I let the members kind of participate in the writing? I would say generally no, but I listen. I always listen to their opinion. I always listen. I try to, because I came from a school where you tried to write it perfectly the first time. But that being said, like Daniel Gutierrez is a tenor player that's been with us in Boston. His brother, he's a great story. His brother was in Blue Coats and had marched. He filled a spot in 2012 at Cadets when I was there. Moises Ureno Jr., he's another guy. They were two Pulse guys that we took in. We had injuries. It was like, you're in. I have no audition. It was like, come in to move in 2012. You're in the Cadets. And they no, I mean, that's what it is. I did a quick psychological analysis on the phone with them. I'm like, these guys are good. They're good and they're great players. They'll figure out how we do things. I'm not worried about the style. They'll assimilate the style. In some cases, their style kind of even influenced how we were playing. So I was never worried about that. So literally, I'm telling you, these two guys, they showed up at Move In. It was like, you're in the line, no audition, let's go. And it was fantastic. And Ephraim, the tenor player, his brother, Daniel, was younger. And so by the time I go to Boston at 17, he's kind of at the age where he's ready to march in Boston. He comes out and he marches, a number of years with us. And he is such a great tenor player. He's the first guy, like in 19 and 20, I let him kind of write the tenor feature because he had some great ideas. And we talked about phrasing. I might have gotten in and I was like an irritant. I might have given him a couple like things, but he really did for the first time kind of write some stuff. But there's guys in the line. I'm always asking the guys in the line, how does that feel? We're always adjusting dynamics based on them. Does that feel right? No. Can we do this? Yep, let's do that. So there's a lot of that conversation. Not so much that like people are writing the parts. It's more that they're helping bring the parts to life. Because like what I write is me thinking of the part. I'm either thinking of the part or I'm playing the part. And then I write it down and then they play it. But when they play it, they have to make it their own. So there's a lot of interpretive things that they do to it that bring it to life. So that's why I keep saying it's a member-driven thing, even though I'm the writer and I'm very particular about the system, and our system is very particular. Not so particular that the members can't take charge and adjust, but they're not adjusting a lot of the parts. They're adjusting a lot of the interpretation of the parts. But Daniel Gutierrez, I have to shout out to him because he definitely was one of the first guys because he's just a phenomenal individual player. So like I'm like, oh, what do you got for flam tap around? Like, what do you kind of think about here? And he'll come up with something and go, that's fantastic. Let's do that.
So, I was wondering a little bit about that because he's from the West Coast, right?
Yeah, he marches RCC.
RCC, and when I saw the tenor feature this summer, I was like, this feels like Colin, but it doesn't look like Colin.
Yeah.
Yep. Like just some of like the flam like arounds and stuff, and I'm pretty crude as a tenor player because I suck at tenors, but I do like watching it because I feel like it looks like aliens playing drums because I can't do it. But I was just like so I was wondering about that a little bit. If
he gets the writing credit on that feature, and the same in the 19 feature also. Nice. He's just, we had some moments in the show where it was a stop time, let the tenors play. So that's easy to let the students get involved. Mm-hmm. A lot of my cadet time, Jay Bocook, who is the brass arranger, still at cadets and was the arranger with me for 8 years that I was writing. He's one of the most talented musicians on the planet, let alone in drum corps. So a lot of his ideas that Jay would, I don't know if Jay's listening to this, I certainly want to shout out Jay. He's such an influence on me. What Jay would write rhythmically in the brass, what he would write, there wasn't a lot of room to like stop time and play. And when there was, we were doing a lot of the musical motifs at cadets. So there wasn't as much room to do it there. But at Boston, we've had some moments where we could get into that. And I love to get the members engaged. Anything I can do to get them kind of feeling ownership. I always tell the members, even though I have a different job than you, we're equal investors. I really work for them, as I said earlier in the podcast. That's the way I think about it. So some of that is being a coach, like here's the playbook. But, right. There's always room for interpretation. A lot of what we adjust is really the interpretation of what they play. And, it's cool because a lot of times the most interesting parts come out of the members, the way that they feel comfortable playing it. Because how I play is still a little different than how they play, if that makes sense. And that's cool.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.